Hello, and welcome back to Beyond the Transaction, Sky's the Limit, where we take a deep dive into the colorful world of marketing, branding, and customer experiences. This podcast series delves into transcending mere commercial exchanges and uncovering the stories of individuals who are shaping the way we experience beauty and functionality. I'm your host, Katie Baldwin, and today we continue to explore the deeper layers of individual stories, going beyond the surface to understand the motivations, inspirations, and creative processes that shape their work. Joining us is the incredibly talented Josh Edmonds, someone whose artistic journey spans the visual and auditory realms. In this episode, we're not just uncovering Josh's journey and career, we're dissecting the decisions, the risks, and the essence of what it takes to turn passion into a thriving small business. So whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned creative, or simply someone captivated by the magic woven by talented individuals, this episode is your invitation to learn, grow, and be inspired. Let's dive into the incredible journey of Josh Edmonds and find insights that go beyond the transaction. Josh, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. Great to be here.
So first off, how you introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, this is actually a really difficult question because quite a few people ask me this when they know kind of that I do multiple things. And I always find it difficult to pin it down to one thing. Whereas saying everything that I do is I feel like too wordy. I think throughout my career, I've used it kind of a little bit as I like speaking things into existence. So whatever I happen to be, like when I first started off as like a photographer, I was just kind of I was interning at the time, and I was like, oh, I really want to do this photography thing. And so when someone would ask me, you know, like, what do you do? I'd be like, I'm a photographer, even though at the time I was just interning. And it was part-time and I was hardly
willing
doing it.
Yeah.
But the more I said it to people, the more I believed, like, oh, I'm a photographer. And so then after a while, I actually was a photographer, and it worked. I did the same thing with music production. When I kind of put photography on the side for a little bit, got into music production, I just kind of started saying to people, I'm a music producer. And then after a while, you know, when I was actually doing music production full time, that's how I'd introduce myself. So it changes.
So now you're a podcaster.
Now I'm a podcaster.
Kind of illustrated this a bit, but your transition from a band to music production to photography, or which way ever it goes, being a chameleon yourself, to studio owner speaks volumes about your adaptability and your versatility. How do you see this adaptability as a key factor in the growth of a creative business?
I mean, I think in this day and age, you kind of, especially if you're being a freelancer or a sole trader or whatever it is that you're doing for yourself, there's so many resources out there that you can learn to do anything that you want. So I think being adaptive is actually more about just like learning stuff, making sure that every day you're learning something new, or if there's anything that you don't know, that you just go out and learn it, like, because it is so easy. Like you can just put something into YouTube and within, you know, like 5 minutes, you've learned a new skill. Whereas if compared to say like studying, you know, you could spend an entire year studying a certain subject, but you're only learning whatever your tutors are telling you about.
Would you say that's specific to the creative industries?
There's only so much that you can teach someone creatively. You can teach them the majority of the technical side, but the actual creative side, someone has to go and learn that themselves. Well, not even learn it, they have to go discover that themselves, figure out exactly what it is that makes their creative mind tick. It's not really something you can teach. If it's something that I'm working with that's a new artist and maybe we haven't collaborated together before, I'll normally reach out before the session and be like, hey, can you send through, you know, 3 or 4 songs that not necessarily that you just like, but songs that you actually like. The production on this is what I want me as an artist. This is what I want to sound like. And be quite specific about what songs you've chosen, like, you know, it's about production. It's not about songwriting or whatever. It's, you know, there's little details in this song that I really like that I want to recreate. It's still, especially with pop music, most of the new artists that I'm working with, especially if it's a young artist, they're looking up to someone that is a current pop artist that is quite big. You know, like say like Billie Eilish gets referenced all the time.
Yeah.
And so I have a sample collection of like Billie Eilish samples because I know that like the majority of new artists that are going to come through are going to want those sounds. I mean, if I wasn't keeping on top of what is new, then I wouldn't have that sample collection and I wouldn't be able to just seamlessly go into the session and have them ready to go. I'd be kind of in the middle of the session like, shit, I need to figure out like what those sounds are and trying to figure it out on the fly. So yeah, there is definitely a sense of referencing beforehand. Modern music making it's going more and more into a collaborative approach and co-writing, and there's just so many more people that are writing with everyone, like, you know. And I think that's because I think one of the main reasons is because studios have become so accessible. You know, back in the day when the gear was so expensive, there'd only be, you know, one or two or three, say in Auckland, there might have only been 3 studios in Auckland. And if you wanted to write a song or record a song that you wanted to release, you had to go to one of those studios. And so there was less collaborating because there just wasn't as much ways to do it. Whereas these days, there's studios everywhere. Like every producer probably has their own studio.
Something set up.
Yeah. And
whether it's in their basement or a little more professional.
You know? But the thing is, even if it is in your basement, you're still able to get incredible results. Some of the best songs are recorded and produced in basements because, one of the reasons is because it's all electronic and if you're making an electronic song, the song doesn't know that you're producing in a basement, so it's going to sound subtly better. Like it's all just going through a computer. It's all ones and zeros.
True.
But you're also, because the gear's just, you know, the cheaper gear has got so good, and people are manipulating audio these days in ways that makes crappy sounding gear, it makes it sound cool. It's like, no, that's not crappy gear. That's the vibe I was going for.
I kind of want to go back to from being in a band and music production to photography, and now you're a studio owner. How do you see those skills overlap? Maybe
not so much the studio owner, but definitely with photography and music. I find them really, really similar because at the end of the day, my role in both of those jobs is what I describe as I'm the driver of the session. So, and also the technical flow of, say, for example, if you compare a camera to a microphone is capturing a voice, it's running into a computer, you're editing a bunch of things, and then you spit out the final result. And with a camera, you're capturing a photo, it's running into a computer, you're editing it a little bit, and then it's spitting out the final result. So the workflow between both things is very similar. But then in terms of my role, what I'm actually doing on the day when I'm collaborating with either on a photo shoot, it might be the client, models, it might be product, whoever it is that happens to be in the room. Because I'm behind the camera, I'm making sure that things are ticking over, that photos are being captured, that people are feeling comfortable, suggesting ideas, talking with other people about ideas. And the same thing as in a music session, I'm doing the exact same thing. I think the biggest thing for both of them is making sure people feel comfortable in the room.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to collaborate on something creative, that's the most important thing first, is that people feel comfortable. Because if you're not in a comfortable environment, you can't be creative. I think that's a really black and white thing that in my experience, I've found that it just doesn't work. You're never going to get results that everyone's into if they're not feeling comfortable in that environment. I think that was kind of the whole ethos of setting up the studio is, it started from necessity because I was doing this dual career thing where I was kind of doing 50% of my time making music and the other 50% doing like photography. But each time I'd do one of those, I was either having to hire a music studio or hire a photography studio. After lockdown, my partner and I were kind of thinking like, well, we kind of want like a change of space. We want a bit of a reinvention. Let's do something a little bit different. Start a business. Let's try and find like a place that we can turn into a photography studio. We can turn into a music studio. And then we happened to find one as a bonus that we also could live in, which made my commute to work pretty straightforward. And so it kind of like, it was out of necessity, but it just kind of worked. And when we had the space set up, the ethos for it was creating an environment where people would walk into the space and they'd feel like they wanted to create something. But also the way it looked and the way it felt was people like, I feel like I can make something in here. That was really important to me. The studio that I interned in, Thievery Studio, they did it really well. They had just the way they ran the ship in there. And so a lot of those kind of things I learned from interning there was something that I kind of wanted to replicate in my own space.
For those who are navigating this ever-evolving landscape, what advice would you offer to stay ahead and also embrace change?
I think it comes back to be hungry to learn, because there's always something new to learn, whether you've done your 10,000 hours to become an expert or not. There's always going to be something else out there that someone's doing that you don't know. And on top of that, the other thing is that person that's doing something that you don't know, they've probably made a video about it, about how you can do it.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the beauty of it, I remember when I was first learning music production, I'm self-taught. I learned it all through YouTube. Just anything I didn't know, I'd just YouTube it, and I'd get an answer. I'd figure out what I didn't know within, I reckon, average 2 minutes. So quick. And these days it's even quicker because you have TikTok, you know? And I mean, they're like 10, 15-second videos. You've got to make them really, really short. And so like my TikTok account is just all like tutorial videos. I just go through it any day, just flick through, and suddenly I've learned a bunch of new things, you know? It's just,
and do you feel like you use those?
one thing like watching something, be like, oh, that's interesting. Like I'm glad I know that now. But actually to lock it in, I think I read somewhere once, and I feel like this is true because I've done it a bit, is that if you learn something, you've got to do it once. To obviously just watching a video, you're not going to learn it. You actually need to go and do it yourself. You need to do it in a practical sense. So you watch something, you learn it, you go and do it yourself. And then if you do it again 20 minutes later, then it's locked in. Because if you just do it once, it's not enough, you'll forget it. But if you let 20 minutes go past and you do it again, then it's locked in. It's not muscle memory, but it's definitely in your head.
I wonder if there is some parallel to that of starting your own business. You can only do so much research into setting up a studio per se, but actually you need to put it into practice and start doing in order to make real learnings happen.
Oh, I mean, so much of what I did to set it up, I was just winging it. Like I had a little bit of a plan, but it was after COVID where no one really had any plans.
Yeah, totally.
I think everyone was kind of winging it a little bit. And so just kind of made it up as I went along. A little bit of, I guess, faking it until you make it kind of thing. But there's definitely things that I wish I knew, or like I wish I'd been taught or someone had told me that would have made it a whole lot easier. I guess probably the main one that always sticks out for me is the accounting side of it. In the New Zealand schooling system, at least, there is you can take accounting or whatever, but I don't know what they're doing now. I mean, it's been like over a decade since I was in college. That makes me sound really, really old. That's crazy. But like you couldn't take a class and they'd teach you how to use like Xero, for example, you know, and so I had to learn that, and that wasn't something that I wanted to learn. I didn't want to be an accountant, but because I was self-employed and because I wanted to start my own business, I had to learn how to use it. And I found, well, because I use Xero personally, like that was probably, I mean, I've learned so many different softwares, whether it's Photoshop, Premiere, Ableton, Pro Tools, you know, all these different softwares, and the hardest one that I've ever had to learn was Xero.
And it boasts about being like intuitive.
No, it's not. It's not. If you're wanting to be a sole trader or you're wanting to own your own business, just knowing that there's these other strings attached to that. Like it's not just your craft. Like there's a lot of other things as a business owner that you need to get good at, not just the craft. That's only probably less than 50%, to be honest. Sometimes it's learning from mistakes and being like, right, I need to backtrack now because I need to go get good at that. Or it's just suddenly you just feel you're in a spot where you're like, oh, I need to upskill on that. Like there's something that I don't know. And there isn't really you don't really have like a teacher there the whole time that's teaching, oh, you need to go do this and this. You just kind of have to dive in the deep end and figure it out. But I feel like that's kind of part of why I really enjoy it. Yeah. Is because there's always this risk factor. And there always will be a risk factor. Like you don't really get to a point where it's like, oh, okay, swear I can just like chill out now. Like that's one of the things that comes with being a business owner is that you're always taking risks. You're always calculated risks, but you are always like every decision you make because it's your decision. Like it's not like you have a boss that's like, oh yeah, the company is going to go do this now. And as an employee, you just kind of go along with the ride. Like every job I take on is a risk calculation. And that was something that I had to learn. Yeah. Yeah. That and being really efficient with a calendar.
the little things that will keep us down, you know. Correct me if I'm wrong though, but almost having that little bit of risk is the enjoyment of it. It'll keep you pushing forward because you think about if zero risk was attainable, would you keep doing it or would it be almost too easy?
I think I'd keep doing it because it's still my passion, but it wouldn't be as fun. I feel like that you get all the highs because you go through the lows.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and if you didn't have the lows, then you wouldn't have the highs. And so you'd just kind of be in this middle ground. You'd just kind of be trucking along. Everything's working. Sweet. Cool. Yeah. But I feel like what makes those highs is that you have the lows, you know, like you get a win from taking a big risk. Yeah. Which might at the time feel like a low because there's heaps of pressure on. But then when it pays off, you're like, oh, that was my decision that I made way back then. That's paid off now. And it feels great. And that keeps you going.
Could you walk us through the key decisions or considerations you had in mind when designing and setting up Ambian?
Again, I think when me and my partner Emily, we moved in here, we kind of had this blank canvas space. And because it's a photography studio, a lot of those design decisions we had were around like visually how it looked. And when we first moved in here, we knew that the space had like really good bones, but we just kind of needed to the main things we would actually take stuff out. Like when we first moved into the space, it had like dark blue carpet through the entire, like all over the floors. And for a photography studio, dark blue carpet soaks up all the light. It's not what you want. And so when I first actually came through to look at the space, when the agent wasn't looking, I like went into a corner and I like pulled up a little bit of the carpet. I was like, what's under here?
Yeah.
And when I saw that it was concrete, I was like, oh, we're on. And so the first thing we did when we moved in here was we ripped up all the carpet, all the underlay. And I spent like probably 2 weeks like sitting on a concrete grinder, grinding the entire floor to turn it into this polished concrete floor. And that was something we had planned before we moved in, but it wasn't really something that when we were looking for spaces, we were like, oh, it's got to have a concrete floor.
Right.
Just the space happened to have one, and that just kind of worked, with what we wanted to do. But otherwise, yeah, it took on a life of its own. When we first moved in, we kind of had this idea of we wanted it to be like mid-century kind of vibes, all this mid-century furniture. But the building's from like it's a 90s building, so it was never a mid-century building. And I think once we spent a bit of time in here, we realized that let's not try and force it to be something that it's not. Let's just like embrace what it is. And so all the kind of creative decisions we made about what we wanted to do with the space, designing it and all that kind of stuff, they just kind of evolved. Like it just, we'd come up with an idea, we'd sleep on it. We'd be like, okay, do we want to put this couch here? Like, okay, we'll sleep on it. Wake up the next morning and be like, yeah, I think that couch should go there and that coffee table should be moved out.
So it was all quite natural growth and evolution of the studio.
Yeah. There definitely wasn't a grand scheme or plan at the start that I kind of knew that this is how I wanted it to be. I just knew that we had a space that I could do photography in, I could make music in, and that was enough.
What were the key elements you prioritized to ensure it not only met your creative needs, but also fostered an environment conducive to collaboration and growth?
Yeah, I think it comes back to probably the visual thing again. Obviously, you can tell I'm a heavily visually influenced person, but for me, the way something looks, like if you come into a space, how it looks and how it feels, I feel like it has a big influence on what you want to create in that space. I mean, I don't know if other creatives do this, but because the other thing I love doing is I love renoing. And what we've done to the space, I did all the renovations. And one of the big things I really enjoyed about renovating the space, which I really, really miss now that it's finished, is going through the time of renovating something, whether it's sitting on a concrete grinder or sanding wood, is once you've finished something, you put it all together and the idea that you had in your head is now a reality. Like you've built it, it's there and it didn't exist before. And being able to kind of like stand back and look at it and be like, yeah, okay, I can see like how that came to be. Or if it's really, really good, you could just stand there and admire your own work. Like I feel like as artists, that's one of the things that we just get as like, that's a byproduct of being an artist, is that you just get to stand there and enjoy what you've made. I get a big kick out of that. And I think what you hope is that when other people see that, they're going to get a kick out of it as well. And when it comes to a building or a space that you're going to then create other things inside of, I feel like if you can have that as like I feel like that's what creates an inspirational space, is if you can kind of see the work that someone else has put into it, you want to go in and be like, oh, okay, sweet, I feel like I can make something in here, it's got for lack of a better word, it's got a vibe to it.
Yeah. The vibe.
The vibe.
Speaking of the vibe, I would say Ambian Studio reflects a very collaborative space. Do you have any advice to other business owners?
Probably more as being self-employed. You kind of are like your own billboard, I don't mean that for once. I don't mean that visually. I mean that how you come across, how you communicate, how you socialize with people. Because if you're going to create a business that is collaborative, like you've got to be someone that people want to collaborate with, And so I feel like building a rapport with someone, or if you've just met someone, like having almost like little icebreaker tricks. One of the ones I have is my pug Zoe, who's just walked into the room. and I mean, you've experienced this with Zoe, and like everyone that walks into the studio, I'm not saying everyone go out and get a pug. I mean, if you want to, they're great animals. But One of the things that I find when I think about my collaborative approach, like one of the great things is having an instant rapport with people, and whether that's them seeing a pug and being like, oh my God, there's a pug in the space that we're going to be working in today. And I always like, whenever the clients come in, I always send out Zoe, like, Zoe, go like break some ice. And then I'll kind of follow afterwards and be like, oh, hey, I see you've met our pug Zoe. And they're already in a good mood. But yeah, I think aside from Zoe, being someone like you want to be someone that people want to collaborate with. And so being able to build that rapport with people, developing, I guess, like a mutual respect for each other's work. Because that's the other big thing is that if, you're not necessarily creating for someone. Like if we're talking about a collaborative approach, it's like both people or everyone that's in the room is contributing to the whatever you happen to be creating. And I feel like everyone having a mutual respect for other people's creative ideas and opinions and just for each other as human beings, I feel like that respect is something that makes people want to work with you again. Or on the flip side of the coin, if you don't have that, New Zealand's small, the industries are small. You don't want to get a bad reputation for not, I guess almost just not having that respect for people because it is really small. It is all word of mouth, really. There's only so much you can advertise yourself. Like it comes down to, like how people talk about you.
Oh, that can make or break businesses.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it makes such a big difference. I feel like I've been very lucky throughout my career to work with people, almost like mentors that I really respect that have been really, really good at that. And they've kind of taught me like, like even if they're not consciously teaching me, but something that I've noticed is the people who have the most success, especially in the creative industries, are the easiest people to work with. The thing for me is I wouldn't be doing any of this if it wasn't a passion. And that's, I think, what most creatives could probably say is that they wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't a passion. At some point, it's got to become like bread and butter, I guess. One of the things that I've been quite fortunate with, but also I guess a way that I've kind of tried to lay out my businesses and just having this dual career thing is not only if there's not much photography work on, I have something else to fall back on, like music production, I was really, really grateful for that over lockdown and COVID. To have something to fall back on, like obviously I couldn't do any photography, but I could still do heaps of music production. Yeah, making sure that it stays a passion, because once it goes into that realm of it being just a business, especially in the creative industry, it kind of takes away something from it. And sometimes that can be good because sometimes you have to make those hard decisions where it's like, for me, for example, like music production, especially in New Zealand anyway, it's not a huge industry. There's not tons of money in it. For me, it's very much like a passion project. Like I'll never not do music, even if I was getting paid absolutely nothing for it, I'd still do it because I've invested way too much of my life in it to let it go now. I'm too far gone. Yeah, exactly. But also just because I just absolutely love it. And the same thing as with photography. I mean, I definitely, when I first, even now, but definitely when I first started, I just had, I was passionate about it. I would do it. And I feel like the way you define that is that I'd do it in my spare time. Like even if I didn't have to do it, when I was interning, I would go in, I had keys to the photography studio, access to all the gear. And on my weekends, I'd go into the photography studio and just play around with the lights, just get my friends in, take photos of them. Looking back, that's actually how I upskilled as well. But what I was actually doing then was I was creating this passion for photography, which is now turned into a job. And I feel like that is like the thing that's got to be at the very start is you've got to have a passion for something. Because if you have a passion for it, then you can go anywhere with it. It can just stay as a hobby and you just keep doing it, or you can turn it into a job. But you're going to have so much more drive to do something if you're passionate about it, because you're going to want to spend your time doing it.
I think one of the downfalls of turning your passion into business is that it starts to fade away the passion. Have you ever experienced anything like this? Oh,
100%. And like, even after everything I just said, with music, it's when I was a teenager and I like in my early teens and I played the guitar and stuff, but I wasn't really into music production. I played the guitar just because my parents made me learn an instrument.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes, isn't it?
But I remember when I was listening to music as a teenager, the way I listened to music then it was so emotive. Like, you'd put it on and it would completely change your mood. And I wasn't pulling it apart. I wasn't trying to figure out what people would, how they made it or anything like that. You just put it on and you just listen to it from like a recreational point of view. Like it just like lifted my mood. And that's part of it's kind of gone, which is kind of sad.
Right.
Because like that's the whole point of music, right? Is that it's such a emotional thing that can completely change your emotion, everyone else's emotion in the room. It can completely change the vibe of the room, like it's got so much power, and it's this invisible thing that comes out of the speakers, and like that side of it definitely is gone for me. Like now I listen to music and I like, if I'm not in a session, I find it really hard to listen to music that has lyrics, because listening to someone's vocal, I'm like, I'm trying to pull apart like how they've written the song or how the producers produce the vocal, and so I listen to a lot of like lo-fi like jazz music now, mainly because I literally can't make jazz music. I'm not that of a good musician. So because it doesn't make sense to me, I can actually just enjoy it. But compared to when I was a teenager, I just don't quite get the same like emotive kind of feels from music anymore. It's a bit sad, but I think the thing that I've gained now is when I make music, I really like the concept, and I get the feels, I get the emotions from this, is when at the start of the day, if you go into a session and you're writing a new song, the song doesn't exist. You don't have anything. You don't have chords. You don't have lyrics. You don't have production. It just literally doesn't exist. There's no sound waves. There's no invisible magic anywhere. It's not there. And by the end of the day, you can press play on your computer and this sound comes out of the speakers, this invisible sound into your ears, and makes you feel a certain way. And if the song's good, by the end of the day, everyone in the room is like really hyped up on the song. Like there's a good energy in the room, and that feeling is worth it. To have just plucked something out of thin air, like didn't exist at the start of the day, and now you can press play, and the sound waves like create these emotions that you feel, and you're like, we made these emotions together, And so not only is it hearing it feels good, but also the fact that everyone in the room is feeling the same way, and you're having those feels with other people. Not only in the moment does it feel good, but it also strengthens relationships. I have like some of my best mates now, the people that I make music with. And I think it's probably down to going through those experiences with them. You spend so much time in the studio with them, and you have what we were talking about earlier, like the the highs and the lows. You have the lows with them where maybe the song isn't, it's not like you write a hit song every single time. Like you have a song where you're just like, man, that didn't quite work.
Right.
But then it's all worth it because then you have the songs where it's like, man, that really worked. We've got a hit here. And that feeling at the end of the day where the songs come together and I describe it as like you've climbed up the hill, and climbing up the mountain is really, really hard. And you kind of feel like you're getting near the top, but the song's not finished because you're still got to come back down.
Yeah.
But when you're coming back down, you can sprint the way down. Like you've already got it in the bag. You've been to the top of the mountain. You've got the song like locked in. You've got a hit, and then you just enjoy the experience coming down the mountain. Well, you've still got a little bit of work to do, but you've made it.
It's such a collaborative process. You still love music. It's just in a different form almost. It is in the creation process.
I might actually have this wrong. It might not be because I make music. It might be because I'm not a teenager anymore. Because I feel like when I was a teenager, and I feel like everyone could probably relate to this, you'd hear a song that you really liked, and you'd be like, how do I hear more of this? And so you'd find out who the artist was. And then you'd find out that they've got like an entire album of the same kind of stuff that you just like absolutely love. And suddenly that's how you become a fan of an artist. And I feel like, when the majority of people that make pop music, they're making music for teenagers, right? That's because that's what teenagers do. They hear something and they latch onto it and they're like, this is me. This music sums me up perfectly. I'm a fan. Whereas like, you don't really get like 35-year-olds being like, oh my God, this is it. I mean, I still do. I hope people still do, but not as much as when I was a teenager. Slightly embarrassed to say this, but maybe not because they're a great band. But like for me, like the Backstreet Boys, when I was growing up, when I was like a 12-year-old, and like hearing the bit like I Want It That Way for the first time, and then like that album Millennium, and like every single song on that was like my childhood. There's so many, like I put that album on now, and every single song like sounds nostalgic. And I feel like I don't quite have that anymore. And saying that, I did actually
Huge asterisks on that.
And saying that, probably not so much a Backstreet Boys fan anymore. I mean, everyone moves on. But one artist that I've just recently listened to, that for the first time in a long time, I'm like, you know what? I love everything on this album. This album not sums it up, but like I just want to put it on in the background, put it on in the foreground, whatever the vibe is, I want to put this album on. And it's the latest Rolling Stones. And I was born after the Rolling Stones obviously had their time. And so I've been alive almost in between. I think they might have released one album when I was slightly younger, but this is their first album in close to 2 decades, I'm pretty sure. So I'd never been on my radar. And then they dropped this album, and it was around the same time that Blink-182 dropped their latest album. And after being a massive Backstreet Boys fan, I got into Blink-182, and that was the rest
Natural
of my
progression.
Yeah. It was funny because Blink-182 just used to take the piss out of the Backstreet Boys. I definitely let the Backstreet Boys go. I got into Blink-182, and that was like the rest of my college years. All I listened to was Blink-182. The reason I got into a band, the reason I'm into music production was because of Blink-182. So, and like I've like their entire discography and even the individual members, what they've done, like I know it like the back of my hand. It's like everything I listen to. And so their latest album, because the band's just got back together, had quite a bit of pressure on it, and just not a fan at all. Like I just don't like the production. I feel like it isn't what it used to be. And then I listened to the new Rolling Stones album, which I'd never heard of. Like, I mean, I'd heard their hits, but otherwise I hadn't really listened to like their albums. Heard this album, the production's incredible, the songwriting's incredible. It's not overproduced. It's got this nostalgic vibe to it, but it's very modern production. Like it's punchy, and the mix sounds great. And you go back and you listen to the old Rolling Stone stuff, and you're like, man, this is just the same thing but modern and done in such a good way. So yeah, I'm a Rolling Stones fan now.
Yeah, so now you're a deep dive. That's how you introduce yourself now. Rolling Stones. It's funny how these little moments shape exactly like our career paths. And the fact that music has always been a passion of yours, that will always evolve, but you've made it a business. How do you go from hobby to turning that profit?
Yeah, great question. The way I did it anyway, I feel like when I talk about things, it makes a whole lot more sense in my own head. I do this quite often, but the way I did it was I was a photographer. I'd gone through the intern process, and I was doing photography full time, and I was getting paid quite well for it, but I wasn't doing any music. And I got to a point where I definitely had this like itch that I needed to scratch. That was music production. And so luckily I had, at the time, I'd met my girlfriend who is now my wife, and we'd got quite serious quite quickly. And she said, you know what, you should just take a year off photography. I'll support you. Go and do music production. This is obviously what you want to do. This is your passion. If you don't do it now, like, you know, we want to have kids later on. We have a kid now. Like I wouldn't be able to just take a year off photography to do music production now. But at the time she said to me, like, this is what you're passionate about. You need to just go and do it. And so I took a year off photography, and me and my production partner, Joe, we just were like, he quit his job as a teacher. I quit my job as a photographer, and we got a lease on a studio, and we just worked with everyone and anyone. Like every single day we were in the studio with a new artist. And we went from no one knew who we were to suddenly within a really short amount of time, we were working with everyone and people. We kind of had this buzz about us, which felt really cool to be like, we were like the new producers on the block. And it was because we were just working so hard. We were just, because we knew we'd quit our jobs. We were like, we're not just like fluffing around here. We're giving up a lot to be here to do this. So we need to try really hard. But I think giving ourselves an opportunity and getting ourselves in that position is what actually made us push through. And because we were doing it so much, and because when people would ask us that we didn't know, like, hey, so what do you do? And I'd be like, I'm a music producer.
Yeah.
Even though at the time I might not have been making any money out of it. It might not have been what I would call like a career, but at the time it's all I was doing, and it's all I wanted to do was be a music producer. And after doing that for a year, by the end of that year, we'd started to get releases. We were working with basically every artist in New Zealand. Well, we were writing with them anyway. And then out of that, we've just kind of ridden that wave ever since. That was probably about 6 years ago. And you know, the New Zealand industry is pretty small. So once you kind of find like your click, I guess, it's almost enough to have like a career out of. But I think to go back to your question, that's it. Like it's just about doing it. getting yourself in a position where even if initially you can't make money out of it straight away, don't see that as a roadblock. Maybe you have to go live with your parents for a couple of months or whatever it is. Make a sacrifice to free up that time so that you can do something full time and invest that time into it, because you might not have the money to invest in it, but you have something to invest in it, and that's time. And the more you do it, it'll eventually become a reality. And again, the other thing is, speaking it into existence. The more you say, like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm going to do. And eventually, you go to bed every night and you're like, yeah, I'm a music producer. And you wake up the next morning, yeah, I'm a music producer. And you get to a point where you're actually like, oh, I'm making money out of this now. I'm actually a music producer. This is my job.
It's so inspiring, because I took from your stories that support system is so imperative to help you kind of break through, whether it was your wife or partner or even your producer partner, to kind of take that leap with you and work as hard as you can, because everyone has the same amount of time in the day. And what you choose to do with it is obviously your own.
You've summed it up. I mean, that's the thing. Everyone does have the same amount of time in a day. And how productive you are with those hours is up to you. But I think if you're wanting to go out and do something that is, say, like starting your own business is a great one, because there is a lot of all the risks that you could have. Being an employee there's next to no risks, unless you're crap at your job and you get fired. But that's not really a risk. That's just work ethic. Yeah. But going out and starting your own business is probably one of the most calculated risks that you'll ever take if you decide to do it. But that's it. If you have the support network, it's about building the things before you go and take that calculated risk. And I guess this is the calculation part, is being like, okay, do I have a support network around me? Do I have either small, like, money to invest in this new business, or do I have time? Because you need at least one of or both of those things. And then it's literally just about taking that leap of faith and just doing it, because it's so easy. I've seen this so many times, and even me and Joe, my production partner, like, we've been talking about being music producers for years. And every time we'd meet up, we'd be like, oh man, we're doing these jobs. But man, like, imagine, because we'd kind of done a little bit of music production together. And every time we'd do it, we'd be like, this is so cool. I wish we could just do this. We'd always say that, like, I wish we could just do this. I wish we could just do this. And it got to a point where I remember we were actually at a gig, and I was with Joe and I was with Emily, my partner, my wife, and me and Joe were talking about, man, like, imagine if we were just like music producers, like the classic chat that we'd had so many times before. And I think Emily almost just like, it's like she just kind of like, like she just flipped, and she was just like, quite sternly, it was just like, can you guys stop talking about it? Can you just freaking do it? And literally in that moment, me and Joe were like, should we just do it? Should we just quit our jobs and do it? And we're like, okay, let's just do it right now. And so Joe, like, I remember that evening he wrote his like resignation email, and well, I don't actually know if he wrote a resignation email, but he definitely did something that locked in the fact that he was no longer going to be teaching anymore. And I did the same thing with photography. And then we went and got this lease on the studio. So we had these things locked in. And so we were like, well, okay, we owe it to ourselves now to do this. We're locked in. But the biggest thing was making that jump. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, especially if you're in like your comfort zone. If you're and if you're an employee, that is a very comfortable space to be in. Financially, time-wise, you're going every day. Your support network is your fellow employees or the people that you work with. And to go away from that, to take that risk, almost seems like, what if I screw it up? Like, what if I can't do it? And I feel like it's got to get to that point where it's a calculated risk. You know that, like, maybe it might not work, but what's the worst thing that can happen? You can just go back and you'll find another job, whatever. But the thing is that if you make that decision, you've almost proved yourself that you can do it in that very first stage. Because if you can go in and like change your, almost like reinvent yourself a little bit. And I'm a big believer in, I love to do it every like 3 years or so, is just be like, you know what, I'm going to go reinvent myself a little bit. Like, and I might be like, okay, I'm no longer going to tell people I'm a music producer. I'm now going to say I'm a wedding events, a wedding venue owner.
Yeah, stay tuned, everyone.
That's what I'm about to phase into. But I feel like, just having that reinvention, and then just getting yourself in a bit of an uncomfortable position and just embracing that, being like, this is what I need to be doing right now. It's
so true. It's with anything, with any new business, it's with any new venture that you're curious about. Just do it. Nike said it, Ben.
Just like Nike, just do it.
Kind of wrapping up, I love your take on how you perceive the current state of businesses in New Zealand.
It's probably been a pretty tough year for everyone. But at the same time, we now have a new government. we're going into summer. It's looking like this summer's going to be, I don't know if this has got anything to do with it. It affects my mood, but it's supposed to be an El Nino. Compared to last summer in Auckland, I think a lot of people are looking forward to that. I mean, from my point of view, I feel like because of COVID, and this is probably worldwide as well, is that I think there's a lot more people that are starting their own businesses. And I think it stems probably from the fact that a lot of people maybe worked from home over COVID, and they were like, you know what, I could get used to this. I think a lot of side hustles were created over lockdown. And a lot of those side hustles, people are like, well, actually, this isn't my side hustle anymore. Like, this is taking up all my time. And, you know, and maybe that's how your business is growing. I know I've just been talking about, you know, how you need to like put everything aside and just like jump into, you know, being a small business owner. But maybe it starts as a side hustle, a passion on the side. It might be a hobby. Then all of a sudden it kind of, you know, turns into something else. And I think to go back to your question, state of business in New Zealand, I feel like that's happening quite a lot, is that there's more and more people that are like, I don't want to work for the man. And the fact that, you know, the internet is at such a point these days where you can just, I keep coming back to this, you can just learn so much so quickly. It's just like a haven of knowledge that's right there in front of you. And if you can learn how to use that and access that and turn it into something, whether it's a passion, whether it's goes from a passion to a small business into a job, you know, like that's, I think, really encouraging for the landscape of small businesses in New Zealand. Is the more of us that there are, the better it's going to be for everyone, you know?
Totally.
So yeah, I think it's in a really good spot. There's a lot of hours in the day. And if it's something that you're wanting to grow from if it doesn't exist, like you don't, you know, say it's a new skill that you haven't learned yet. I feel like if you want to learn something new, you still have, even if you're working for someone else or whatever it is that you do, you still have so many extra hours in a day. Like just because you're working a full-time job, that's really only such a tiny part of your day. I mean, I'm saying that because I'm a bit of a night owl. I quite easily stay up
until people sleeping. What are you doing?
Yeah. But I think, you know, like there is still a lot of extra time that you can invest in another passion. And to dive into a completely different subject, but from a mental health point of view, I feel like having a passion and doing something in your spare time that is that something that you are passionate about, but it's also like productive, that's something that you could potentially turn into a side hustle, even if you're not like this has to be a business, this has to be successful. It's just something that it's like alongside what I do for a job. This is something else that I'm quite interested in, that I'd like to kind of see where it could go. You know, like that does wonders for your mental health. Like having this little thing that it's almost like this little baby that you can like nurture. Yeah, it's something that you think about a lot, like your business. And it helps you just kind of keep going forward, because you're like, you know, every decision I make, you know, you're thinking about like, why am I making this decision? Like, what does it come back to? And I just think it helps you move forward.
Totally. Thank you, Josh, for your time, the conversation, sharing your experiences. Tell the people what you or Ambian Studios are up to. What can the listeners look forward to?
I have an album that I've worked on with a band called Park Road that's going to be released, which I'm super excited about. The studios, we've now just made it available for events, which is awesome. Then definitely go give me a follow on Instagram, Ambian Studios, or if you want to just have a chat about anything, follow me, just Josh Edmonds on Instagram, send me a message. Would love just to like have conversations.
And don't forget to follow Zoe.
Yeah, Pug Monster Zoe, if you want to follow an incredibly cute pug.
She's so cute. And to our listeners, if you're still listening, thank you. Please find Skyzer anywhere on the World Wide Web. Follow, like, bookmark, alert, whatever tickles your fancy. We will be back to discuss more about the creative people and businesses shaping Aotearoa. But until then, I'm still Katie Baldwin, and this was an episode of Beyond the Transaction. Cheers, everyone. See you later. Bye.